ago. And that's possibly why there's not too many people using that park anymore. There's a bit of a George Glassy park over on Agnes Street, I think it is. That's a far better park, and it gets a lot more use. So certainly, if the developers are offering a good offer of land and better equipment within 100 metres of the existing park, well,
it's all together. My main question is, have you seen the total plan and can see that the access on Grove Street is going to be a pretty minor one compared to most of the people will be accessing off Graham's Road?
Yes, well, I have seen the future development, but just referring more so for the safety of children heading towards Tynwald School, even if you were closer to Graham's Road, I'm sure if I was in charge of my own children, they would be accessing Tynwald School through the Grove Farm, away from Graham's Road. You're never going to get away from the traffic on Graham's Road, and yeah, my submission is more do away with the park. We've got an offer of a new park, and if there's an access through to the Tynwald School from any other subdivision, wherever it goes, obviously parents are going to encourage their children to go to school through that access.
A supplementary question. Do you think the playground that they propose is in the ideal part of the subdivision? Should it not be further north so that it covers a better area of the people that are going to be living there?
I just missed the start of that, Stuart. What was that? The very start?
Do you think that the present site of the proposed playground is in the right place? Should it not be further north of the subdivision, so it's more in the centre?
Right. Of the new park, you mean?
Yes.
Right. Well, if you head into the park, you're sort of like, it's going to be 100 metres away from where the existing part is, approximately. Even if you went further north, it's only 100 metres. It's not a long way to go. And the further away the park is from Graham's Road, as far as I'm concerned, the better. So, yeah, I'm actually quite happy with the position of the new park, considering the further development once the whole development is done right throughout to Graham's Road.
Thanks, Tony. There's no more questions here. Nothing further to add?
What's that? Sorry, I just missed that last bit.
Yeah, no more questions here. Have you anything further to add?
No. That's stand by my submission, and I just hope the council sort of gives it good thought, keeping in mind the little people and the growing role.
Thanks for that, Tony. You can carry on and listen if you want, otherwise we'll hang up.
Okay. I'm actually driving to the coast, so I'm probably going to lose coverage. So, just if somebody flicks me an email and gives me a bit of an update, that'd be great.
That'll be fine. Thanks, Tony, for your submission.
Okay.
Thank you.
See ya, bye.
Our next submitter is Andrew Mason, and Andrew is here. Welcome, Andrew. And your submission is on page 35 of the submission booklet.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay on this?
We can hear you perfectly okay. If you'd like to add to your submission, or the floor is yours.
Right. By way of background, I'm also the project manager of the subdivision, amongst some other subdivisions in the Ashburton district, for those that know. I'm on the Lakewood board. I'm the managing director up at Camrose. And a few years ago, I had some involvement with the Ashburton Business Estate, assisting council with the development of that. as I said in my submission, this land is zoned residential. We can subdivide it as of right under the district plan. We don't need a Grove Street access to do that. We could just actually just build a cul-de-sac off Graham's Road. Canvassing all the various departments of council before we put the plan together, it became apparent that there's a lack of parks in the area of sufficient size, and so we're looking at putting one of those in our subdivision. Going back to, as I said before, we could just do a cul-de-sac. The problem with doing that, we end up with a park that Grove Street, Harlan Street, James Street, Catherine Street can't really easily access without going all the way up into Graham's Road, coming down Graham's Road, going all the way back in. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of metres too far for the usual type of distance that all councils like to see between parks. So the obvious thing to do was create a connection between Grove Street and the subdivision so that the existing residential areas could access the park. The other accesses don't work. There's a right-of-way access that simply isn't wide enough, has third-party ownership of some of the dominant tenements. And so at 6 metres wide, you can't have vehicles and children walking up and down it, so that access doesn't work. That was one of the reasons given for an alternate location of the park in the subdivision. And it was one of the reasons that we looked at it earlier on and it just didn't work. Locating parks next to a stormwater reserve has the benefit of borrowing some amenity from the stormwater reserve. It actually makes the park look bigger. Working with Colin Windleborn, we come up with a scheme where we create some provision for access to the future residential D land to the coast side. It's not quite east, but to the east to the coast, which we would seek to put a covenant on, council would own, and until such time as an equal area of land is provided by an adjoining owner to contiguous land by an adjoining owner to create a larger park, that area would effectively be part of the park, albeit as a local purpose reserve adjoining the recreational reserve. So this location has a number of benefits: protects the existing council sewer under the ground, provides access to the adjoining land, and in the meantime has park status and retains that until such time as an equal area of land is swapped with council for that to the east. But I think that the fundamental point is that the subdivision, we could build it as a cul-de-sac, but that just doesn't fix the existing problems of the existing residential areas, Grove Street, Harlan Street, James Street, etc., having no park facility that's appropriately sized, and using the existing park, which is a council asset, just as a property in East Street might be. It's not a recreational reserve; it's a freehold asset. Utilising that and turning it into road gives the existing residential areas access to an increased sized park.
Thanks, Andrew. Councillors will have questions. I just have one. You're talking about future connection to residential D. On the map, where would that connection be?
At the bottom. All right. So you see the blue in the bottom left-hand corner. That's the stormwater reserve.
Yep.
Then you've got the green, which is the recreational reserve.
Yep.
And then right next to that, there's a piece of land which looks like a road. And we're proposing that is, but just as this current land is a title, we're proposing that there's a covenant put on that title when we vest it with council that says that can be used for future road when an adjoining piece of contiguous land of the same size, which is 880 square metres, which would effectively be at the bottom of the green, is vested with council. So the park therefore becomes 2240 plus 880 square metres for the time being, until such time as the adjoining land is seek to be developed, and that road is swapped for land underneath the green, so council retains a park of the same size, and that future access ability is created.
Great, thanks. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Morning, Andrew. Do you not think it was a bit presumptuous of you to advertise the subdivision with the road in before you even approached the council?
So we'd had discussions with council. Subdivisions, there was a news article about a subdivision website that crashed in Rolleston. That was on rural zone land that they hadn't even applied for a plan change to rezone residential, let alone apply for a subdivision consent. It's quite common. And as I said, council have in receipt of a plan as part of our subdivision consent application that shows an alternate design with no access off Grove Street, which actually gives us one more section and 100 metres less road to build. This isn't the most cost-efficient way to build the subdivision. The most cost-efficient way to build the subdivision is not putting an access through Grove Street. Doing so, we would have one more section and 100 metres less road to build. What that doesn't do, though, is actually provide a community with access to an enlarged park. It doesn't provide the community that will be buying these sections with easier access on community roads rather than minor arterial roads through to areas like Kimball School and heading south to Timaru. We, on balance, thought that this was a better outcome for the community.
Supplementary question. See in the latest advertisement in the paper, the Grove Street access has been deleted. Is that your intention now, or why was that?
No, the subdivision consent's just as it stands.
Why was the ad in the paper had no access? That was taken off.
I'm not sure that's Ray White. I'm not sure why maybe they did it because of the contentiousness. I'm not sure, but I saw Ian Hyde in the room here somewhere. The subdivision, he can confirm the subdivision consent hasn't changed.
Confirmed that. Councillor McMillan.
Thank you. Morning, Andrew. Your proposed playground area down on, we can see it on the left-hand corner of the map there. Does that meet the requirements of the district plan with being within 400 metres of there being a playground within 400 metres of every house in the district? It's not the district plan. Sorry, not the district plan.
Yeah. I think I saw a report where there were some houses that were just slightly further away, but I'm not sure whether anywhere in our subdivision gives the existing residential areas 100% saturation of a playground within 400 metres of every single house.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cameron.
But I'm not even sure that Grove Street does either. The Grove Street playground does either.
Councillor Cameron.
Thanks, Andrew, for your submission. How long a distance is it from Graham's Road to the proposed park location?
I'm not sure. I could sit here and add it all up.
No, just give me a ballpark. Like, is it? So you think it's less than 400?
It's probably about that, I'd guess.
Yeah. Have you read the optimal size and location for urban playgrounds and things?
Absolutely, yes.
Does it meet the taking away the stormwater, which would be an amenity there, regardless of the co-location of the park? Does that meet the optimal size?
Together with the proposed future access,
Which is a temporary measure.
yes. But coming up with a scheme with Colin Windleborn where we put a covenant on that title, so that the council can never lose that combined area, because if that land is needed for future access, then it must be replaced metre by metre with contiguous land, effectively on the bottom of the page.
Sure. Have you had an opportunity to read the submissions from the neighbouring? Yeah. Do you have a particular view on some of those?
I mean, change is always hard for some people, and especially for those next door. You know, I don't know how we got to a point where council has a park with freehold status, just like a property in East Street does. But I suspect, given the shape of it, given where it is, it was a road reserve without official road reserve status that probably sat there growing weeds or being mown, and you know, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago someone said, why don't we put some playground equipment on it, and it ended up like that, as opposed to just every single other park in Ashburton that goes down the vested recreational reserve route. So as a result, it kind of ended up being understood that, you know, this is what it is, but it's actually not. It's a freehold title owned by council. Funnily enough, at the end of a street where it looks like it was a road reserve. So I appreciate change is hard, but you know, at the end of the day, we are creating a park of an appropriate size where this one isn't. This one's about a third of the appropriate size, 100 metres away. And not only is it an appropriate size, it's actually 10 if you add the green space of the stormwater reserve, because they are green, you know, they're planted in grass, and there's often a few trees and bits and pieces scattered around it. Though the combined area of the stormwater and the recreational reserve is 10 times the size of the existing Grove Street Park. So we're getting a green space that, for the average child, they don't know whether the stormwater reserve that they run up and down the hill in, because they do, next to the jungle gyms or whatever playground equipment we have on the recreational reserve, it matters not a jot to them whether it's a stormwater reserve or a playground reserve. I know up in Camrose, every time it snows, the kids are playing around in those stormwater basins, because that's the best place in Methven to go tobogganing, short of Mount Hutt. And, you know, so the stormwater reserve, whilst it's a utility reserve, being adjacent to a recreational reserve, the kids are getting something that's 10 times the size of the current playground.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors. Good morning, Andrew. Mr. Moore, previous submitter, said that the equipment in the playground was going to be better. Thus, my question is, can you please tell me what equipment's that you people are putting in this playground?
We will need to be led by council to a certain extent on that. We don't, and I'm not sure that council would want to give us the full choice of what the equipment is. We in our subdivision consent application, we're proposing that the first $100,000 of our reserve contribution is supplied in kind, and so that the equipment happens quickly. We would anticipate running a process similar to what we did up in Camrose, where we develop up a scheme, show it to council for approval, and once we've got approval, then install that, rather than give something to council that you're going to own and maintain and look after and be responsible for the health and safety of. You know, council's going to want the final say on what you're receiving as your asset.
So how do the submitters know that there's better equipment going in? Are they just surmising?
It'll be new. And the Ashburton Council's got a history of putting in new equipment that's pretty cool.
Okay. Were you aware that Councillor Wilson is absolutely correct? First, we as a council here, councillors, heard about this was in a submission from a neighbour.
Yes.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, my question is, that can be quite a wet area, and you're going to have a big drainage area. What mitigation steps will you take to protect the children? I mean, you talk as if the swale is going to be lovely grassy area the whole year. A lot of the time, if we get water, it's going to have water in it. How is that going to be mitigated next to a playground?
That's correct, but the engineering that we're required to do, that the council will be signing off under engineering review, will require an amount of calculations that have reference back to the permeability of the soils there, which we understand because the engineers have done test pits, they've done infiltration testing, so we know the speed at which water will infiltrate into the system there. These holes in the ground aren't just holes in the ground. There's actually a lot more that goes on underneath the surface layer of the grass than what a layperson might understand. The mathematical calculations of the entire subdivision, the square meterage of the streets, of the footpaths, of all the impervious surfaces, multiplied by the 50-year rain event that ECAN give us the modelling for, is applied to the volume of that stormwater basin and the amount of time it takes to disappear into the ground. So it's not, it's a known and quantifiable mathematical calculation that gives us the answer of the size of the basin, the depth of the basin, and the design of the basin underneath the surface of the grass. And so we're not going to be having something that's going to be sitting there with a stagnant pond for days or weeks.
Councillor Lovett.
I was just going to ask, some of the submitters were worried about losing one playground. So what is your timeline? Do you think this new playground would be up and running? Is it going to be at the end of the development, or could it be brought forward?
So it's in stage one, and it's likely that we'll build stage 1, 2 and 3 together, or maybe stages 1 and 2 and then stages 3, 4 and 5 together. So we're looking at building the entire subdivision, but it's just in terms of what's a bite-sized chunk for the available labour in the district, and the supply of materials, lampposts, culverts, manholes, Toby top covers because they're quite hard to get at the moment. So we're just looking at that, but it's very much in stage one. The construction period is probably in the vicinity of 6 months, and then there's another 2 or 3 months after that, dealing with pressure testing of the sewer, all the bits and pieces that we do with council to make sure that the contractors, whoever they might be, have built the subdivision correctly and everything's been tested and everything's tickety-boo before we hand it over to council, vest it with council. And there's a couple of months generally beforehand, and we're fairly well through that with the engineering of design and reviews and that sort of carry on. So, at best, it's less than a year, but it just depends on when we actually activate, if we go forward to having a dual access subdivision, when we actually activate that second access, as to how much under a year it becomes. But it'll probably be 6 months, but it may be slightly more.
Okay, no, they were just hoping it wouldn't be 2 or 3 years.
No,
that's good to know. Right.
Okay, I've got Councillor Rawlinson. Some lights are coming on again, councillors. If you could think of your questions and just have one set of questions at one go would be helpful. Councillor Rawlinson? Yeah. Oh, sorry, Elaine. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Good.
Just a couple of questions, more practical stuff than anything else. If you start building this stage number 1, would you put in work road in from Graham's Road, or are you going through Grove Street?
In terms of construction traffic, we would generally take it off Graham's Road.
Right.
There'd need to be construction traffic building the street, but the main entrance for construction activity would be Graham's Road. It's much more logical than running big trucks up to Grove Street. And it's not just running the trucks. It's if it rains, then those trucks have muddy wheels, and so you don't want to be sort of having a short distance between your subdivision and a big residential area, because it just causes problems with trying to manage the not so great effects of that. So it's a no-brainer to run it from Graham's Road.
Yeah, thank you for that. How good is your forecast? How long do you think before all the stage 5 is finished? What is your time limit?
I would think that sitting here today that we will have constructed every single section by, I'd like to think we'd get it done by Christmas next year, but I think we'll probably poke into the new year a wee bit for the last bit. The new year being 2023.
Thank you.
Councillor Rawlinson?
Thank you, Andrew, for coming in. I think it's clarifying a lot of points. But my question is around the 100,000 offer by the developer to meet the 100,000 for the play equipment. But in Brent Smack's submission, he was asking if funding for the play equipment could come from development contributions. And I just wondered, is there a crossover there, or is he coming at it from a different angle?
No, so the council has a policy under subdivisions that 5% of the section values, and that's assessed by an independent valuer, is paid to council at 224 as a reserve contribution. So what we're proposing is that the first 100,000 of that is paid in kind with equipment, and that's a process we did once before. With the Camro subdivision, with one of the, we've done about 9 stages up there now, but one of the stages we did that where we paid in kind rather than actual cash, in an attempt to speed it up. I suppose we're using some of our reserve contribution money to pay for that, but rather than give it to the council, and then council go through the process, however long that might take to put some equipment there, we're suggesting that we'll organise that and do that as part of the stage 1 build, because it might make it happen quicker. So it's just an attempt to make it happen faster, really. Not trying to circumvent any council processes, because we're still going to need council to sign off on what assets you're going to receive as your own. But by doing it this way, we think that it might just be quicker than vesting a park with you, that you then got to go, right, now I suppose we should go and organise some reserves and playground equipment, and then that process going forward. Whereas you would receive the vested park with the equipment that you've agreed to at the same time as receiving the land. So there's a feeling that there's probably potentially a 12-month speed up of the process of getting equipment installed as a result.
Thanks.
And if I'm wrong, we're happy to talk to council about doing it another way. But it was just, the reason we're doing it that way is just simply to speed it up, shrink the gap between closing Grove Street and opening up the new playground with the equipment installed.
Thank you. Andrew, I have one question. It's probably going to be the final one for you. The other red connections onto Grove Street, who owns those sections? There's the park we're talking about, then there's 2 others, little red dots that go right to Grove Street.
Yep, so the Grove Street's the one on the left, and the one in the middle, that's been sold, and the one on the right is the skinny right-of-way that parties either side have right-of-way access to, and it's only 6 metres wide. So having vehicle and pedestrian access on that, bearing in mind it's already got vehicle access enshrined in its right-of-way status with the existing neighbours, we never saw as a safe option for kids.
Does it connect to the subdivision, or does it?
Yeah.
It does. So it's a walkway. People could walk through there?
People would walk through there at the same time that vehicles would drive through there.
And connect, and that subdivision will connect to it as well, vehicles.
Whether we put vehicle access over it to our subdivision or not, there's still vehicle access to it. The existing sections on Grove Street have vehicular access to it. One of them, it's their only vehicular access. If we would probably put vehicle access into our subdivision from it as well, to the 2 titles that access it.
So the one,
but regardless of whether we do or don't, there's still vehicle access to it. Yep. And having a 6 metre wide right of way as a shared conveyance with vehicles and children or pedestrians is just not. It's not the done thing.
So the middle section, you said it's been sold. Who used to own it?
I'm not sure.
Oh,
I'm not sure who it's been sold to.
yeah, so your subdivision never owned it.
Yeah, they did, but it was sold.
It's sold to someone else, but you used to own it. You've sold it. Yeah, right. Thanks. Councillor Falloon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just following on from the Mayor's question, that right of way could be made accessible for kids to access out onto Grove Street to go to school?
Oh, yeah, absolutely it could. But you've got to remember, if it did, it's got vehicles going up it as well.
But only vehicles that belong to the people who have the right of way at the moment, which would be very few vehicle movements and will probably not be at the same time as the kids would be accessing school.
Maybe so, but I'm not sure that council's ever let a shared access of that width go past before, so I'm not sure why it would all of a sudden be safe now.
Thank you. I think no more questions, Andrew, so thanks very much. We'll go, thanks for your submission, very good. Well, answered a lot of questions for us, which was great. We will now go through the rest of the submitters, and more than welcome to stay and listen. We'll move to, on the submissions booklet, there's 45 submissions in total, and we'll go to page 6, I think it is, page 6, and the 1.3, if you've all found it. And we're going to do the submitters in support first. I'm on the summary page. You will have read the actual submissions. This is summarising them into themes. Got it? Everyone got it? Great. So 1.3.1, and the submitters there, Better Park and Playground. And the submissions from Katie Anderson, Vikram Arya, Fiona Cameron, Portia Colley, Ashley Ferguson, Grant Property Group, Sarah H, Julie Hay, John Hogwig, Stacey Howden, Jenny and Holmes, Colleen King, Courtney Leoy, Andrew Mason, John McLaren, Alicia Miller, Matthew Malloy, Rachel Moore, Roger Morgan, Belinda Pearce, Jennifer and Ponty Proctor, Brent Smack, Agnes Scott, Kendall Spurgeon, Timothy Stoddard, Rowan and Margaret Tonks, Tim Stoddard, Grace Thompson, Nicola Thompson, Matthew Webb, and they are supporting with existing park and playground equipment is small, old, unsafe and unattractive, they are saying. Existing park is need a revamp. New park will be 250% larger, safer and more attractive. New park adjoins a stormwater reserve, which will make the playground larger when it's dry. Greater benefit for families. Removal of the existing park, supported on the basis that a new and bigger and better park is built close to the old park. A playground is more than a place to play, it's a meeting point and opportunity to meet new people. Existing park's not big enough for the amount of children that will be living in the development. Disposal of the Grove Street's a positive, as offset by a new and bigger park, larger. New park a better fit with council's objectives for parks and recreation. Council could use part of the developer's reserve contribution to go towards the new modern and safe play equipment. The playground will be modern, safe and better for those living in the surrounding area. The objectives are for parks and recreation or bigger parks than the existing 881 metre squared, which the developers are aiming to accommodate. So that's the submissions. Any comments on them? No. Moving on to the submission of Ashley Ferguson, Grant Property Group, George Jennings, Andrew Mason and Nicola Thompson, and it's around park location. The park's 100 metres from the existing park and still accessible for families outside the Ashbury Grove subdivision. If the existing park is not closed, the residents of Catherine, Jane, Harland and Grove streets to the west of the subdivision will have no easy access to the playground. Any comments on that? The next section Malloy and Timor. Fiona Cameron and Stuart Allen, meeting future needs. The existing park's not big enough for the amount of children that will be living in the park, in the development, and continued growth in wider timbered area. Funding of the new park, no questions on that. Funding of the new park, Fiona Cameron and Alan Stewart. Council does not have to fund the new playground, so should take the opportunity presented. Council should take up the developer's offer of $100,000 in new play equipment for the park. Any comments on that? Councillor Mackay.
A question, Mr Mayor. I know you're trying to do everything right, but you've got 10 or 11 pages still to go. Can we just do headings, maybe easier? Because we as councillors have already read all these, as you already said earlier on in the day. I'm just trying to help you out, Mr Mayor. You've got a marathon effort in front of you.
Right, we can do that. Councillor Wilson?
No, I don't agree with Councillor Mackay. People have taken the effort to submit, and if they're listening, they'd like to hear to know whether they are a proportion of those that agree or those that disagree. Also, I was going to ask the question about capital funding. At this stage, I guess we will discuss it later, but I'm in favour of collecting the 5% financial contribution, and then we discuss what we're going to do about the 100,000 and the.
We'll bring that up.
That's a completely different situation.
We'll bring that up in the deliberation. So you want to carry on as we're going? Brent Smack, operating funding, notes that council records a disadvantage of a new larger playground being more maintenance costs for ratepayers. Points out that it'll ultimately be in excess of 80 additional ratepayers, so he does not believe that the existing ratepayers will carry a higher rating payment because of the park in Grove Street area. The benefits of a second road access. Fiona Cameron, Ashley Ferguson, John Hogwig, George Jennings, Gavin Johnson, Rachel Moore, Brent Smack, Timothy Stoddard, Kendall Spurgeon, Nicola Thompson and Matthew Webb commented on that, and they're saying access off Catherine Street will provide safer access to Timwell School. The road access into the subdivision will allow better traffic flow. The closure of the Grove Street Park will provide the new subdivision with an alternative access in case of emergencies. Will allow traffic flow from both ends of a subdivision. Points out that if the Grove Street Park became an access way, then school children could exit the subdivision and walk, bike or drive along Grove Street and along Jane Street without having to go near Graham's Road. They also note there's a lot of heavy vehicles using Grove Street and Catherine Street to access State Highway and does not believe the road passing through the Ashbury Grove will divert more traffic. No questions on that. The next point, economic benefits to the wider community. Vikram Arya, Fiona Cameron, Jenny and Holmes, Courtney McCallum, Alicia Miller, commenting on opponents should embrace the opportunities this will bring to the community. Subdivision will bring vibrancy to the community, development of the region and local community. Ashburton is improving other parts of the town. This could benefit Timwell area. Other reasons, Belinda Pearce and Kendall Spurgeon notes that the population of Timwell is growing quite quickly. It'll be an attractive sales point for families and will benefit the school. They also note there's helping the town to grow with more new housing opportunities available to everyone. Relocating the playground provides future proofing of Timwell's growth to the east of the subdivision by providing this area with an appropriately sized and readily accessible playground. Notes that New Zealand is currently in the middle of a housing crisis and this subdivision will offer fantastic opportunities for homeowners. Gideon Holmes comment that all new developments can result in compromises having to be made and believes that in this case the developers are offering a perfect solution for the community. So that's the submitters for the proposal. We have reasons for opposition. Candice Clark, CM and AJ Cox, access not needed. The submitter does not want to accept the road access as a need, it's a want. The submitter prefers the developer use the Graham's Road access only. Safety issues, Candice Clark, CM and AJ Cox, Evans, Collins Family Trust, Kath Gill, Emma Hampton, Shane Higson, Winston Lee. Around traffic safety, no traffic issues in the past 15 years because drivers are mindful of the children's playground. Second access will concentrate unnecessary traffic down Catherine Street and to and from Graham's Road. Opposed to the sale of Grove Street Park for access, as it will create dangerous cross intersection at Grove and Catherine Street and put a large volume of traffic up Catherine Street, a quiet residential street. Concerns that the danger of extra traffic volumes cannot be controlled with street signs and accidents would be unavoidable. Submitter is concerned about the traffic situation going from a T intersection to a four-way. Councillor Lovett, you've got a question?
I was just going to ask the question, could we note that safety issue for when, if the access does go through there, that some controls are made on that Rose Street playground if it becomes a road, the entrance into the cul-de-sac, could we do some development there to make it safe for
We'll make
children?
note of that now and we can discuss that in submissions.
Yes,
so
yeah, I think
Richard
we
or
need to.
someone will make note of that and we can talk about that when we're deliberating. Concern about extra traffic volumes turning into Archibald and Catherine Street. Billy's Council around 1975 tried as much as possible to alleviate cross intersections. Approving the disposal of the Grove Street Park would create what previous councils tried to avoid. Council created a paper road a few hundred metres north to allow access to lands now proposed for Ashbury Grove via a T intersection. Road through Grove Street Park will create safety issues for neighbours. The submitter believes putting the road there will cause accidents and doesn't want to be woken at night with a car coming through the fence. More traffic through the subdivision to Catherine Street will create safety issues for the new playground. No noise issues. CM and AJ Cox, Emma Hampton and Shane Higson talk about noise. Believe the road through Grove Street Park will create noise issues for the neighbours. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just coming back slightly with some of those comments about cross roads. I lived in Tynwald for a long, long time, and I'm still living there, to be quite honest. Crossroads are not that dangerous. They're done all over the place. There's about 20 odd, and Brian mentioned that as well. There's 20 cross sections in Tynwald without any problem.
Okay, we'll make note of that for when we deliberate. We can raise it again. Second bridge, Emma Hampton, Winston Lee ask if the second bridge comes across from Chalmers Ave, where will it go from there? They know that council has bought the Bell property on Carter's Terrace. Asked because if the second bridge does flow on to join Grove Street in the future, then their quiet corner of Tynwald will no longer be defendable. Submitter hopes if council does give permission for access, it does so with the condition that the main access off Graham's Road be completed first. And they believe that the proposed new bridge and new traffic lights in Tynwald, it would seem logical to do that road first. Developer failure to communicate, Candice Clark and Shane Higson. Submitter and family had no contact from the developers regarding the proposed new road right next to their home for 15 years. Submitter considers developers were presumptuous to start selling real estate on the proposed subdivision. Submitter thinks the developers counted their chickens before they've hatched. Submitter notes the developers has not approached him in any stages about this proposal and advises to never assume or was asked. Councillor Falloon.
Yeah, just a question on council comment on the bottom of page 12 about second bridge location is still contingent on government funding. Would see the traffic come off the second bridge east of Grove Street and head south until it meets Grants Road. Where's Grants Road?
Graham's Road.
Oh, should that not be Graham's Road?
It should be Graham's Road, yep.
Yeah.
We'll correct
Thank
that
you.
when we're deliberating. Catherine Gill believes that the developers have put the cart before the horse. Developers should have got this proposal signed off with council before they put out any real estate plans to the public. believe it is arrogant for the developer to propose the use of a public playground to provide access to their subdivision. Existing Grove Street Park. The submitters Candice Clark, CM AJ Cox, Kath Gill, Leonie Chu. Upgrade the existing park. They're asking for, submitter asks why the current park cannot be upgraded. Upgrade could be achieved at least cost, in shorter time frame. One submitter, which was the CM and AJ Cox, would fundraise for an upgrade. Submitter notes the upgrade existing park could be achieved at least cost. Comments Grove Street Park could be extended into Ashburton Grove subdivision to feel more like a playground for both areas. The submitter's concerned about where the children from the south end of Grove, Catherine and Grove Place will play, asking whether they have to go into the subdivision. Candice Clark and the Evans Collins Family Trust say keep the park, it's well utilised despite needing an upgrade, and despite its views to the contrary. Believe the existing park is adequate for the time being. Discussion of a larger park should occur when land further east is developed. Jennifer Cross talks about 2 parks are required. By shifting the park, council is taking access away from the existing community. Other feedback. Jennifer Cross, the development should have their own park and be responsible for upkeep using homeowners and association fees. Kath Gill inquires whether allowing the disposal of the Grove Street Park will allow other developers elsewhere near a public space to do a similar thing in the future. The submitter states they must be declined so no one else tries to bypass our laws. Shane Higson asks whether having two street fronts will increase his rates. Winston Lee notes that the subdivision plan only one playground is shown, which is at the end of stage 1. So some people living at the northern end will have to travel the length of the subdivision to get the playground. It'd be more practical to have the playground in the middle. General feedback. Portia Colley, interested in buying equipment from Grove Street Park if we decide to sell it. CM Cox submitted glad they have no view of new subdivision as they have their rural outlook. Again, the Coxes talk about consultation. People further up from the park should not be having a say in this as the road is not going to affect them. Believe their views won't be heard as developers already started selling these sections. Does not understand why council let things go this fast before asking the community views. Submit a champion to have this park when their children were little. They question now why this park, why they should now lose the park. The submitter notes that the council has allowed trees to be removed that their children used to climb and build huts in. Submitter argues by the time the new playground is available, their grandchildren will have to walk further to the the grandchildren will be too old to play in the park. Linnea Roach, curious to see what the shaded area next to the proposed playground will be. If it's for stormwater, they have doubts about the placement of the playground because of safety issues with water. Jennifer Proctor, sewage reticulation runs through Grove Street Park, which is one of the reasons for its location. Genian Homes bought a number of sections in development and advises that interest in the sites is high, believing this is an exciting for the future of Timor. Roger Morgan requests new park to caters to all ages. So that is the summary of all the submissions, councillors. That we're at the stage now where we will hand over to Richard. Richard, if you'd like to take us through the process from here.
If you don't mind, I'll take my mask off. I don't feel comfortable speaking with it on. Ordinarily at this point we would go into deliberations on the issues and I'd bring you a PowerPoint presentation discussing process with Mayor Brown last night. The intention instead is to adjourn the hearing at this point.
I think, Richard, we could do the deliberations and we just won't make the decision until so we'll do deliberations now while it's fresh in our minds. Yeah.
Very good.
Richard, just thinking, masks are compulsory, so I'm sorry you're going to have to wear one. Sorry.
I'll speak up too.
Yeah, we can hear you greatly.
Great. So, key points of background, obviously the request to dispose of the park has come from the developer of Ashbury Grove subdivision. We heard from their project manager this morning. Council has an obligation under the Local Government Act to consult on disposal of a park, and to this point in the process Council has taken no position for or against the disposal. The decision to dispose of the park is completely separate from decisions on the resource consent for the subdivision, but obviously it has an impact on the configuration of the subdivision depending on what Council decides. We received 45 submissions, which was a really excellent response. 36 of those submissions were in support, 9 were opposed. As you approach a decision on whether or not to approve of the disposal or to decline the disposal, I think it's always helpful to think about what's the end game, what's the outcome you want for your community. And I think what the subdivision offers in its current configuration is orderly development, a bigger and better park, sensible traffic linkages, and an economic boost from the development of 90 houses. When you are looking at the disposal of a park, and it's a pretty rare event. I've worked over 30 years in local government. I have never before been involved in this particular part of a local government act, and when I went to Google work from other councils to get an appreciation for it, I couldn't find any other examples anywhere else. And the section 138 is concerned with the effects of, the phrasing is excluding or substantially interfering with public rights of park access. So it's people losing access to open space. In terms of that, I've done some numbers comparing the number of households within the 400-metre radius of Grove Street Park with the number within the same radius of the location proposed in the subdivision, and have also looked at a more central park location. And in the case of Grove Street Park, you've got 200 existing households, 80 future Ashbury Grove households, and an estimated 13 future residential D households, giving a number of 293, and I've put plus or minus 5% because I didn't use a very sophisticated approach to working out the 400-metre radius, but I think it's pretty good, and I don't know the configuration of how the residential D land might be developed. So it's 293 plus or minus 5%. At the location proposed in the subdivision, that number reduces to 260 plus or minus 5%, essentially because you've got existing households west of Grove Street that you've got basically 2 blocks of them that 100 metres takes them outside the 400 metre radius. You've still got 80 in Ashbury Grove and slightly more residential D households, so 260, plus or minus the same 5%. And if you move it, the park location more centrally, you get to a point very close to the existing number of households at Grove Street Park. You capture all of the 90 Ashbury Grove households. You'd get all of the future residential D, and you lose, well, you get 175 households in that are existing. So 291 plus or minus 5%. Obviously this decision is separate from resource consent decisions. There are 2 resource consent decisions that would need to follow if the park was to be disposed of and turned into road. The parkland is fee simple, but it's zoned open space A, so that would require a resource consent to build a road on, and then of course it's a resource consent for the subdivision. There has been some questions today around moving the park to a more central location. Essentially, given that the subdivider has given you a proposal with the park where it is, then you would need to agree that with the developer. It also creates some issues in terms of our local government act consultation, because we've had 45 submissions, but that was based on the subdivider's original proposal. So potentially an opponent, if council decided that it wanted to encourage officers to negotiate with the developer to move the park, opponents might say, well, actually your consultation around section 138, you've now made a decision that was outside the scope of that, so there's a degree of legal risk associated with that decision. And probably the best way to manage that risk would be to actually repeat the consultation. So I think there are potentially 3 options for you. 2 of them are the obvious ones, either agree or decline. And the third, if you are interested in pursuing this, will be to agree to dispose of Grove Street Park and then invite your officers to work with the subdivider to seek a better, i.e. more central location for the park.
Thank you, Richard. We did have some questions before, which we were saving for deliberation. I know Lynette had one, and I think Elaine might have had one. But I do have one. You talk about needing 2 resource consents. One's to build the road, and I understand that. Then a resource consent for the subdivision. When Andrew Mason spoke, he said that it was a permitted activity to build the subdivision. Could you just clarify that for me? Why the second second consent is needed, if it's a permitted activity?
Could I get Mr. Hyde to answer that?
Thanks.
Thank you. Very briefly, it's not entirely correct that that it is a permitted activity. There are no permitted subdivisions in our district plan. I think, and Mr. Mason will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what he was alluding to was the fact that it's anticipated by the district plan, and it's generally compliant in terms of lot sizes and things with what the district plan anticipates. Is that effectively what you're saying? Yeah.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up. Lynette, you had a question earlier.
That was about the safety aspect of that road. If the Grove Street Park become a road, and I know residents are worried about the speeding traffic, they'll use it as a racetrack out of there. And with Mindful, this road access is going to have a lot of children coming in from other streets to that particular playground, and whether a safe park, footpath and that could be constructed in this space for children with their scooters and everything else, and perhaps a roundabout, or do some safety aspects to slow traffic down.
Through the chair, yes, as part of the subdivision process, and I believe this is an ongoing matter at the moment, there are traffic safety assessments done, traffic assessments are conducted. The council and its roading team will consider all of those matters as well and make sure that speed limits are appropriate and any traffic management and conflicts are managed, and that's just a standard part of the technical assessment of any subdivision that we go through, just to make sure that it is actually safe and the assets that the council vest are fit for use effectively, and that's just a central part of the job.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. How far are we, is that the only thing we're going to discuss at the moment, whether we approve or decline the Grove Street, or are we going to discuss the whole financial setup that they're talking about from donating playground equipment as part of the financial statement? Is that included? To me, that's included in the whole situation.
Yeah, discuss your financial contributions now, but we're not going to decide on 1, 2 or 3 today, but get those other items you're talking about underway.
Well, thanks, Mr Chairman. I would be agreeable to dispose of the Grove Street Park with the developer's wishes, the playground in its present site. They would pay the full 5% financial contribution. They would give us $100,000 donation to the council so that we can build the playground to our specifications. So they will get their access, they will give us the playground they promised, they'll give us $100,000 towards the playground equipment, and we will build it to our specifications. That was my bottom line, otherwise I would say no.
Okay, we'll raise that again at the next council meeting we make the decision. Councillor Cameron.
I have a question, if I may, to Richard through the chair.
Richard, or?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Can you just explain to me what it means if it's not a designated recreation reserve, and what it doesn't mean? Does that influence any requirements around this decision?
Are you talking about the
Grove Street, existing Grove Street Park, that it's not designated a recreation reserve?
existing park?
The Grove Street subdivision.
Yeah, the existing.
Yeah, the existing Grove Street Park.
Yeah. If it were designated recreation reserve, then you have to use a Reserves Act process to change the designation of the land, and it's a lot more involved than the Local Government Act process. My colleague from Parks, Mr Hoffmans, is in the room. He is more knowledgeable on the Reserves Act than I am. And as I turned to catch his eye, he cleverly looked out the window.
I'd be very interested in the difference between that and the history of this park, and whether...
Just to clarify, is it a reserve now, that piece of land?
It's not a reserve now, but it is zoned for open space.
Yep.
Under the Resource Management Act, hence it requires resource consent.
To put a road on an open space.
Yeah. Connor Lysart at the museum did a little bit of digging into the background, and as best we can ascertain, the proctors, who are also submitters to this process, did a subdivision in 1975 of 5 lots opposite Catherine Street, and the minutes of the Borough Council at the time, sorry, my mask keeps sliding down, it's the difficulty with accommodating my nose and my double chins.
It's covering them well.
And the council minutes at the time record that there was provision made for a road, but the land was never formally created as road, it was left as fee simple. So I think the original intention with Grove Street Park, as Mr Mason submitted, was that it would become a road in the fullness of time as the development moved east.
Thank you. Bert, you nothing to add for that, is it? Have you or not? No. Caroline?
I was going to ask if Bert had anything to add to that.
Oh, okay. Councillor Floon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If council agrees to dispose of the Grove Street Park, what will be the process? Will it be put up for a public auction, which then gives all parties the opportunity to bid on it, also probably gets a better price for council? Or is it just the intention to go down the usual track of getting an independent valuation, and then the developers would get the opportunity to buy at that valuation?
Who can answer that? But I think it would be difficult to sell it because it's got a sewer pipe going underneath it, which you would not build a house over, I wouldn't think, if it was as a residential section. But yeah.
Through you, Mr.
Richard.
Mayor, I think the very best person to answer this would be Mr. Windleborn. We use the word dispose because that's the word in the Local Government Act, and it doesn't necessarily mean that council would be actually selling the park. I believe what Mr. Windleborn would propose is that, and this goes back to the kind of land swap that Mr. Mason spoke about during his submission. So you're giving up 881 square metres of land in fee simple, and when the subdivision were approved, you would get another 881 or 880 square metres of land for future road, which you would use as a park in the meantime, and when the subdivision happened east of that, you would, so ultimately the council retains the same amount of land in public ownership, and at some time it'll be park and at other times it'll be road.
Councillor McMillan.
Thank you. Through the chair. Richard, are we able to go back to the map, please? I've just got two questions on that. So the first one is in relation to open spaces, preferring the proposed park is centrally located. So I'm just wondering where you are, or where open spaces are looking at for that. Sorry, but is it too hard?
Oh. Okay. I've got it up here, but I haven't got it up there. What do I need to do
Escape.
here?
Just press escape.
Do you have another question too?
Well, it was
waiting for that to
both
come up.
relating to the
Okay.
map, but the other one was on the Ray White advertising the stage one. They have site access going through that 87.
It was for the sections that you got. Did you want to go out?
Okay.
But listen carefully.
Good.
So through the chair, open spaces preference for an alternative park would be in the vicinity of, you can see stage 2.
Could you put some point to it?
Have you got a mouse? It'd be stage 2, and it'd be roughly in the position of lots 61 to 65. So on that southeastern boundary, and the ones below that, Richard. So it gives you access into the residential D subdivision, which will inevitably happen in the future to the southeast.
So if that happened, the developer would probably move the retention pond there as well?
It's an engineering question. I think it would probably be unlikely given the land gradient.
Yeah. Okay, because the idea that the submitter put up that they join, and when it's dry, it adds extra amenity to the park that's there. I quite like that idea, but with you moved it, then that would probably not happen.
So you'd lose that benefit.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor McMillan.
No, I think.
Did you want to just clarify the 87 then? What's 87? Turn your thing on. Right, come back to you. Lane?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions. Richard, you call it the park all the time, but it's in freehold section, as I understand. But it's under open spaces to basically use it as a small park. What is too small, what it's for the size, for the area where it should be. As it is proposed, I can see only a lot of positives there. We're swapping a bit of land, what is not a road reserve, with a road reserve for the future. We're going to get a new play area slightly further away, next to a nice big open space. I think it's a great option, and that is going to be a new reserve, a new roading reserve, things we don't have there now. We're just mucking about with something what is not a park, but an open space, with a little bit of open space. I can only see positives, to be honest. And asking a developer another $100,000, I think it's a bit steep. No one else does it, but it's an option.
Steve, good comment.
Thank you, Mayor Neil and councillors. Just something that council should consider with the existing plan you're seeing there, having a recreation reserve beside a stormwater retention pond. Currently in the district, we treat our stormwater retention ponds and we mow them to a standard very similar to our parks, as you know. So it is an open space. It is used by kids for playing when it's not full of water. But just bear in mind the current environment of the Three Waters Review, there is no, that provision of that stormwater retention pond may go to the new entity. And there is no guarantee that the new entity would mow that and maintain that as an open spaces area. So I think you need to consider that it's not a major park, it's really the green park only going forward because of the uncertainty of what's going to happen with that activity.
Yeah, we'll discuss some of that this afternoon, but we're not supposed to be any worse off. Later this morning, it should be no worse off. But Councillor Cameron.
Is there a requirement within new subdivisions to have playgrounds? Through the chair to you, Richard.
Through the chair, no, not as far as I'm aware of, no.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Councillor Mackay.
I just raised a question, Mr Mayor, after Mr Fabish made his comments. So, is he telling us that there will be no conditions on that stormwater retention basin to be used as a stormwater retention basin? In other words, is he telling us that if the consent says grass so high in the basin to treat the baddies in that under what might be coming, that government, straight out, the government has the right to actually alter conditions on consents, because that's what would happen. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't
Sorry,
think so.
Mr Mayor, I think perhaps answer that by saying there is uncertainty. So there is no one who can answer that is correct or not. There's no yes or no to that. There is uncertainty.
So to follow up on that, Mr Mayor, when the Ashburton District Council issues a consent, it is open for interpretation of that consent and can be changed at the will of whoever controls the consent.
No, but if that that property, that the consent will have a life, if ownership is not with council, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that there will be variations or change in the future. I think what I'm reading Mr Fabish's comments to say there is uncertainty. It's not saying that government will be able to ignore consent conditions, but it will be less under the control of council than it would be in the current environment.
Okay, if I may. So if a consent is issued by this council, does it have to go through the normal process if the person controlling that consent wants to change it?
Yes, there's no change to the consenting process other than with a review of the Resource Management Act. But they will have to deal with whatever legislation impacts on their ownership rights.
It's not clear, but I'll leave it.
Thank you. We're taking us to the end. No more questions of deliberations. I just also note that we've had a site visit to the site as well some weeks ago. There's an invitation and most councillors were there, if not all there, attended that. So we have a recommendation there which is to receive this report, and I'll look for a move and a seconder of that, and then once it's received, then we will await a decision at the October 6th council meeting. A report will be prepared by Richard, and that will be presented at the October 6th council meeting. Mover, Councillor Falloon. Seconder, Councillor Grant. No debate on that? I'll put the motion. I'm in favour. All in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you. Received that report. And thanks very much, councillors. Now we'll break now for a cup of tea and come back for the second item of business, which is Three Waters Reform Proposal Council feedback. Thank you.
going to stop speaking, Your Honour.
Welcome back, councillors. So we're on item number 5, Three Waters Reform Proposal, and it's for the council feedback to DIA. We've been listening to the feedback from the community, and it's in, all that feedback is in the report. Hamish is going to say a few words, and I'm going to hand over to Tony to take us through the proposal for the feedback. And at that stage, when they've got the speaking at that part of the procedure, we'll ask for questions, and we'll take all the questions you have then of them. And once the recommendation has been moved and seconded, then we'll go and debate. There will be no more questions in that time. So whatever questions you have, get them underway while the staff are present. They will not be answering questions once we're in debate mode. So if you could adhere to that, that would be great. Hamish.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I just wanted to say a couple of comments in relation to what this report is and why it's here. So the broad overview. We've been dealing with the Three Waters Reform Proposal, as you're well aware, and over the last couple of months, Council's worked hard to understand that proposal and the data for this community. And at the end of the 2-month process, which is now, Council has been asked to provide feedback to the DIA and Local Government New Zealand on the reform proposal. And as the report outlines, we're not being asked whether we opt in or out at this point. We're being asked to provide feedback on the proposal. As part of that process to provide feedback, we did do a survey that went to the community, and you see the number of responses, and you have that in full in front of you, and that has helped form the recommendations that you have in front of you. But so too has the workshops that Council's held, so too have the webinars that's been attended, the assistance from Morris and Lowe, all the things that we have heard and done over the last period of time, we have tried to reflect in this report and an attached feedback document for DIA. So we think we are delivering on the requests and the obligations that DIA have put upon us, and just repeating that at this stage we are not being asked to opt in or out of any reform process. And in fact, the Minister of Local Government has reserved or advised, if you like, that there will be decisions from Cabinet following the closure of the feedback period. So we would logically expect sometime in the ensuing weeks there will be some sort of advice as to what the process will look like from here, from the government. So with those few words, Mr. Mayor, we're open to help you through this report.
Okay, thank you, Hamish. Wise words. Okay, so if we go to Tony, you should take us through your report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So through the chair, today I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of what the report is saying and how we got to here, where we've got to. You'll all be well aware that Havelock North drinking water outbreak in 2016 brought the issues in and around drinking water to the fore with the government, but they had concerns around the monitoring and evaluation associated with drinking water predominantly for probably the last 15 to 20 years. So it had been on the radar in some way, shape or form. From the beginning of the process, government indicated that their preference was for publicly owned multi-regional entities. And last year, Council committed and opted in to the initial stage of the discussion. So that was called Tranche 1, and that saw us receive $8 million in funding that we could use for Three Water projects. But in doing so, we did not commit to any future phases of the reform. We didn't transfer any assets, liabilities, or establish any new entities. That was just to keep us around the table having the discussions with government. So the steering committee, of which Hamish is a member, has been really vocal and really involved in the process so far, and have been a really good advocate for local authorities. Over the summer of 2020-21, you'll remember right when we were in the middle of developing our long-term plans, Council was asked to participate in a request for information process. This is a significant process for council, and it saw many teams across council preparing a lot of data that got sent to the DIA. That data then informed the basis of the government's proposed release in June and July, and was the basis of their modelling for WICS. So as a result of the modelling, the government officially notified us earlier this year that the government has decided to establish 4 statutory publicly owned water service entities that own and operate Three Waters infrastructure on behalf of local authorities. They would establish independent competency-based boards to govern each entity. It would set a clear national policy direction for the Three Waters sector, including the integration of any new spatial or resource management planning processes. It would establish an economic regulation regime and develop an industry transformation strategy. As a council, Ashburton was placed in Water Services Entity D, which is predominantly the majority of the South Island, barring areas up in Nelson and Marlborough. But the precise boundaries are still up for discussion. On the 15th of July, when council announced the partnership with LGNZ under a Heads of Agreement document, the government announced a package of $2.5 billion to support councils to transition to the new water entities and to invest in community wellbeing. Our allocation under this is $16.8 million, but the conditions associated with the package of funding have yet to be worked through. The DIA committed to talking with local authorities and iwi Māori over August and September, which is the phase we're right in now. Just to reiterate what Hamish has said, we have not been asked to opt in or opt out of the reform, and it's actually not legal to do so at this point in time. Rather, we've been asked to provide feedback, which has formed the basis of our conversations with you as council, with officers, and also with the community. If the reform does go ahead, we anticipate that we'll be continuing to deliver the water services until the 30th of June 2024. Just like to draw your attention to point 24 of the report, which is referring to the average cost per household. I've got an error in there. In the second bullet point, the first bullet point referred to our council's average cost per household is $610 under our 21-22 long-term plan. That's incorrect. That's coming from the WICS data set. With the WICS data, we are concerned that the WICS data has used population density and area based on a UK approach to come up and develop their numbers, which is really different to the approach that we've taken in our long-term plan, which is built from the ground up and our knowledge of our asset conditions. Our long-term plan 21-22 has a significant Three Waters program and budget associated with it, but there are uncertainty that remains around the impact of Te Mata Arawai, which is the water regulator, on any new water standards they may introduce over that time. But at this point in time, as officers, we believe our budgets are adequate to do the job. In saying that, the DIA have had their data sets peer reviewed and suggest that it is a reasonable indication of the order and the magnitude of costs that could be coming in the future. So council undertook a series of conversations with experts, so including the Morrison and Lowe DIA, with council officers, as well as the magnitude, the sheer volume of information that you've been given over that time, particularly in the last 3 months of all the different components of this. But even with all of that information, we as a council, you still had key concerns with the proposal. So the key concerns were around the representation of the local voice, given the size and scale of the entities. It's how council can have guarantee of our district's Three Waters investments. As a council, we have concerns around the visibility of future pricing proposals, and we have concern with the impact of proposals on the regulation of private water supplies. We question the reality of stormwater being included in the proposal, how it will be charged, what stormwater assets would and wouldn't be transferred over. We also have concern with how the water service entities will function within council's planning and land development views. Linked closely to that is also how the WSEs will involve themselves with council's civil defence emergency management activities. As we've seen recently with the flood event, it was really important and crucial to have those knowledgeable heads in the room during the response and recovery phases. As we all know, local government is facing a swag of significant reform right now, but we don't have a clear understanding of how they all interlock together. And also that ripples on to the local government governance and whether the reform would impact those who may be choosing or wanting to stand for election. We're really unclear how our rural schemes that are providing stock water will be treated under the new reform process, and also how we ensure that we look after our existing staff and also our existing maintenance contracts with our supplier of ACL. So with these bubbling along in the background, we undertook a community survey to talk to the community about what we're thinking about the reform, what the issues are that we see as sitting in the background, and what we're concerned with. We had a really pleasing response rate from the community. The survey was only open for just on 2 weeks, so we received 504 responses from our community. 97% of our respondents felt that it was important for the community to be able to have its say on how Three Water services are provided. 64% of our respondents believe that the continued improvement of health and environmental standards in Three Waters from what is currently provided is important. 27% of respondents are prepared to pay more for higher standards, with a further 21% happy to do so if the improvements are localised, they're justified, and or they're decided upon by local representation. The community feedback was in line with what you as a council had raised as areas of concern. They want to make the decision to opt in or out of the reform, and our community is really concerned about the risk of the reform being made mandatory. Our community doesn't want to see a loss of local assets, of representation or control. They fed back what we had all been thinking, that the process and the structure of the Three Waters proposal is really complex and unclear. They are concerned with the speed of the process to date, and they're also concerned with the governance arrangements, including iwi representation. So further to this, the Mayor asked me and the team to have a look at who within the community survey was keen to opt in or opt out. Now, we didn't ask that question, and we specifically didn't ask that question. But 50% of our respondents clearly stated they wanted council to opt out. 1% wanted council to opt in, and 42% didn't say. But that's what you'd expect when we didn't ask specifically. So as Hamish said, there's quite a process still to go from here. What we commit to from today is on hearing your feedback, and once you've made your final resolutions based on the recommendations we've proposed, is we'll put all that information together and get it off to the DIA this afternoon. That's a whistle-stop tour of the process to date. I'm not the expert in the room. You've got some experts in the room, and Hamish and Neil who have been heavily involved with this, but we're happy to answer your questions if you have any.
Thanks, Tony, for that run through there. It's a very good summary of where we've got to and what we're wanting to do today. So as I said before, councillors, we'll take all the questions now, so think of them, because you will not get a chance once we've in debate mode. It'll be debate only, and the staff will be sitting aside. So questions now of staff, please. Lynette.
I was just going to ask, we have not been asked to opt in or out. Do you know when is that date going to be? Because other councils have come out with their opinions, worried the original timeline was the end of September, and is that still in the document or is that out? They have made no comment.
Hamish?
The government has not asked any council whether they should opt in or opt out. They're certainly not seeking that response from any council by the end of September. They're looking for feedback on the proposal, and the Minister has said that Cabinet will be considering the process in the weeks following the receipt of feedback. So we don't know whether the reform will remain voluntary. We don't know what time frame any decision would be made if we were asked to make one. For those councils who are expressing a view around opting in or opting out, they're simply choosing to do that. But as we said at the introduction, that is not something that is being asked of us.
Councillor McMillan.
Thank you. my question's similar about the larger councils that we have heard that are sort of veering the way of opting out. How much will our numbers change if a large council opts out of entity D and for some reason we decided to opt in? Are those numbers going to really change dramatically?
Hamish?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the numbers only work as they are on the paper if every council opts in or is mandatorily in. So if it remains voluntary or if there is a choice down the track and any council decides not to, then those numbers will not work as they are in front of you. It follows that the more councils that aren't in and the more larger councils that aren't in, the further away from those numbers the reality will be. And there's been many conversations in the South Island that the reform depends in the South Island on councils the size of Christchurch being in for them to work as the government intends.
Councillor Auckland?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. When you say about 50%, Tony, does that include the 200 emails that we've received this morning that were all opposed?
Thank you. Through the chair, no, it doesn't. That's only those who participated in the survey.
Just to add to that, because others won't know, because only councillors have received those emails that the Taxpayers Union set up to ask us to opt out, to make the decision to opt out. So, and we've had about 200 so far. The inbox is full. All very, very similar requests of us. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, a supplementary, Mr Chairman. Why intelligent other councils and mayors are making a decision now? We understand that it doesn't going to hold any water to go out at the moment. To me, why would Christchurch City with a Labour mayor and council, Auckland with a Labour mayor and council, go against their own government? Is it a reason to push the government to make it compulsory? It seems illogical. We've been told if you make a decision now, it doesn't mean anything. We've got to make a decision by December. That's the question. That's the answer you told us, isn't it? Whether we say yes or no, it doesn't mean anything. Why have other councils, intelligent, so-called intelligent councils, coming out so violently against it now?
I think the two mayors you talk about, Auckland and Christchurch, are ex-MPs of the government, and what their political affiliations are now, I don't know. One would assume, but assumptions can sometimes be wrong. But they have, Auckland and Christchurch has said that. Hey.
We would never supposed to answer a question for another council, so we can't answer why someone else has done something. The only thing I'd like to comment on is your reference to December. Now, that is sort of an urban legend. The Cabinet has said they will make decisions about the future process of the reforms following receipt of the feedback. So the idea that we will get to choose by December is not something that I know as a fact.
Well, when after Cabinet are going to meet in October, will we be asked to make a decision then?
Well, that'll depend on what Cabinet decides. So we don't know what that decision from Cabinet will be.
And I've got one final question.
Yep.
Looking at the electoral roll for the South Island, 95% are in the general roll, 5% on the Maori roll. I know we have, under the treaty, we have representation, of course. But to me, in our submission, I would like to see 50% is over the top. Why are we giving 5% of the population 50% of the top two tiers?
Of the governance.
Yeah. Mr Mayor, through you, the reason it's 50% is the obligations under the Treaty for Co-Governance and the manner in which the government interprets that as an equal right around the table. The debate you have about that is for you to have, but that's why it's sitting there at 50-50.
Thanks, Hamish. Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Over the last year or 2 years, we've been talking about this. We've been given information it's getting higher than I am, and it's close to 2 meters. My question is, why the heck are we going to do this? If I look at government or government organisations, health, roading, housing, RMA, local council reforms, none of, okay, those two have to be done yet, but hospitals, NCTA, housing, they've been taken. What happened with them? They went to crap. There's nothing been done properly yet. We just putting in money, and we don't seem to get anything back. Can someone tell me why, and why would it not happening with the three waters?
I think it's a debate rather than a question for
That's
staff.
a question. It's a
not,
question.
Not of staff, I think it's of
Okay,
others.
staff.
But
Sorry,
raise that in debate. It's a good question to debate. Anything further, Lane? No. Councillor Cameron.
I have an engineering question, please, to the engineers in the room. I'm looking at point 27, our asset condition performance, and what worries me is confidence levels for
Carolyn, just pull your machine a bit closer.
confidence, water medium, wastewater medium, stormwater medium. Is that because they do the job, or is that because we don't know, or is there some uncertainty around those, the quality of the, or the condition of those assets?
Through the Mayor, that's correct. It's the certainty of the exact condition and all the information on all the assets. We would regard ourselves as medium, along with many other councils. It is really about just that data we have on particularly condition of assets.
Can I ask a supplementary, please? So with regards to our new asset that we've just, the new wastewater relief sewer and things like that, they would be high, or would you still class them as medium? Is medium sort of the risk level we're prepared to
They'll
take?
be brand new assets, so the condition will be very good. It's just our older assets. We can't put our hand on our heart and say what condition various elements of those assets are without digging them all up underground and assessing them. And we do some of that, but we wouldn't do a lot of it, which is why we rate it as medium.
Can I ask an additional question?
Yep.
What is the life expectancy, if you like, of our assets? Like if you're putting in a new new wastewater relief sewer, what is the life expectancy of that?
So that depends very much on the asset and the type of the asset, what the material of the asset is. We are guided by international best practice asset management guidelines. Pipes, we would typically put it as 80 years life. It varies depending on the asset.
Okay.
I do note that, I wish to just mention that the Wix model did put the life expectancy of assets much lower than what we typically use as best practice.
That was where I was leading to, essentially.
Which effectively does affect the overall financial aspects with regards to.
So what is the
depreciation.
difference in their life expectancy, presumably the manufacturers have some sort of guarantee around the quality of their pipes and things. What is the difference in that?
That sort of information we haven't had broken down into all the various assets. So there's a lot of assumptions and general assumptions across all the assets. As I said, pumps will have different life expectancy than pipelines and different types of pipelines. So it's just detail that we haven't gone into.
How do we get that detail then through the chair so that we can make a decision based on the, potential cost in the future, or? How, are we going back to the DIA with regards to questions of how long they're going to, or is that going to be a faith thing?
All I can say is that we've just based it on what facts and information we have on our assets, and they've based theirs on a largely aggregated life that they would have determined from overseas experience, and there lies the difference.
Thank you.
In the questions, going back to DIA, there's something in there about the financial assumptions.
Yeah, I saw that.
And we don't seem to think that they are that accurate. So we do note that. Great. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm on page 13 and I'm on paragraph 29, where it says, quote, "There is also the potential for council to have to work with and possibly take over private water suppliers." in the light of what I believe the Minister said to questions of the Select Committee in the House last week, is that answer still correct? Because I believe I heard councils will have to. Could it be clarified, please? The question come to the Minister in Select Committee time, that's why I asked it.
Through Mr Mayor, the reform of Three Waters is currently about public supply. The introduction of the water quality regulator to Matarawai will affect all suppliers. The issues around how private supplies with more than one household are impacted by that regulation is unclear, and there is legislation in the Water Services Bill that requires councils, or indeed the future water service entities, to assist private suppliers to meet the standard. No one quite knows what that will mean on an ongoing decades, year by year basis. There is no move at the moment for these reforms to capture private supplies, but other than they will have to meet the same regulatory standard that Te Matarawai will enforce. But where these private suppliers may go in the future, if they are struggling to meet those standards, that's where the involvement with councils in the future or the water supply entities will impact. So it's unclear what the liability will be for whoever is running public supplies in the future.
So, okay, you're saying I heard wrong, that's okay. The other one I have, would it be possible in the recommendation to add a note that there's concern over whether consent conditions will be honoured, especially in stormwater going forward? And also, if the government has not asked us, would that stop our council from giving an indication of whether at this stage we're in or out?
Through Mr Mayor, this is Council's resolution, so when it's moved, you can move any resolution you like and amend whatever you like. So this is just a recommendation, so the addition of any points you want to make is clearly Council's prerogative.
Diane?
Thank you. My question's around the economic regulator, and all through all the meetings we've been to, the webinars and whatever, we keep hearing how important this economic regulator would be, but to date we've had no information around the purpose and the role and the structure of that position. And so is there any indication of when that will be released?
Through Mr Mayor, my understanding is that the work on the economic regulator will become apparent to councils during October for conversation, discussion, feedback, whatever process DIA wishes to follow. One of the justifications, if you like, for the mayoral forum position on the reforms, with which, of course, our own mayor, on behalf of Ashburton, was a signatory, to pause the reforms, was based on a number of things that are currently uncertain that over time will become more certain. And perhaps the most obvious example of that is the economic regulator, because my understanding is the work that's being done on it currently is likely to emerge within the next month for comment and feedback, but you're being asked to give feedback before that's out. And so there's an example, if you like, of the concerns that have been expressed around the timing and of the process.
That's right, because I think it's just a classic example of the inefficiencies of the whole thing when we're being asked to give feedback that they will use judgments on, or could do, and yet there's a great big piece of information missing that we can't comment on.
Correct.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Yes, certainly agree with Councillor Rawlinson's comments here, because basically the economic regulator is going to have a huge part to play, because basically it is going to be the only person that these four entities are accountable to, because there's no accountability back to individual ratepayers or anyone like that. But that is not my question. The question I come back to is, sorry about this, is affordability. Now, I asked the gentleman from DIA about this and really didn't get a satisfactory reply. But these four entities are going to start off with a clean slate. What they are doing is taking over all of the Three Waters assets of every TA in New Zealand, along with the debt that is already against that. They are not starting off with any reserves at all. That means any dollar they spend after that is all going to be debt financed. Now, with the amount of money they say they have to spend on asset renewal and that sort of thing, which is all going to be debt financed, if WICS and if the entities follow WICS and if the asset life of these assets is shortened, how are we going to afford to pay the depreciation on these assets, plus also the debt servicing on all of the extra debt that is going to be taken on to fund these assets? In other words, we as users are going to end up paying twice in one generation.
You can answer that or not?
To answer what I think is the question, if you look on page 12 of the report, in the Ashburton District Council's dashboard, then you are right, the cost of water will, Three Waters will go up from what they're currently paying. WICS assessed that for the Ashburton District at $1,640 per year. That takes account of increased rates of depreciation and the repayment of debt. The comparison to make, of course, is in the event that the Ashburton District Council doesn't belong to Entity D and is trying to operate in the new environment on its own, then that cost is estimated to be $8,690 per year. So WICS or DIA are not saying, that it will be cheaper than it currently is. What they are saying is that it will be cheaper under the reform than it will be if there's no reform. So the increased standards, the regulation is taken account in terms of Council's dashboard.
Thank you for that. Councillor Eatham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I may have missed it, but the Board of Management, for the want of a better word, is there one that controls the whole four entities, or does each entity have its layer of bureaucratic government?
Through Mr Mayor, there's no entity that sits above the four entities once they're fully established. The transition is a complicated process, as you can imagine, if it precedes 67 operations going into 4, and there are therefore some overarching transition arrangements to ensure that runs as smoothly as possible. But my understanding is once the entities are set up and managing Three Waters into the future, then they will do so under the regulatory environment that they have to operate in, i.e. the economic regulator, Te Mataroai, expectations from the governance group around statements of intent, etc., etc., as opposed to having another formal entity to report to.
Thank you. One supplementary question then. Do we know if there's any expectation for each entity to have similar, how shall I put this, operating methods, so that if in the future 4 becomes 2, they can be easily joined together without having to restructure all the, I'm not quite sure of the right words to say here, but if each entity could operate on the same system, for the want of a better word, then if they needed to be joined together, it would be an easy operation. Do we know about that?
And not absolutely directly, except to say that the transitional unit that will be managing the transition will have an overarching role through transition. And so I think it will be likely that there will be many similarities in the manner in which the various entities operate. The only caveat to that would be potentially Entity A, and that's because the one in the north, the Auckland Council, is 92% of Entity A. So the likelihood is that, and this is just me kind of following my own nose if you like, but Entity A will likely be quite similar to whatever Watercare does now. And Watercare is regarded as the highest performing public water provider in the country. So Entity A is highly likely to look like Watercare, I would have thought, in time. And that may or may not impact on how the other entities get themselves set up and operating. So I think there'll be a degree of consistency, and there's only 4 of them, and I presume they'll chat to each other.
Okay.
But there's no, I've not seen any driver to have the 4 as an interim measure heading to further aggregation down the track. I've not heard that.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. How many households are they anticipating will be connected to potable water in the Ashburton district in 2051? I think there is a figure somewhere, but I can't find it.
We'll see if we can find that for you, Councillor. I don't have that number. And
I'll have to get that for you.
The second part of my question is, at the proposed figure of 10,000 per household connected equates to 150 million capital spent per year. That would be correct, would it not, if we're 15,000? Well, we don't really know the answer, I guess, until we get the figure of.
We have 10,000, just over 10,000 connections now.
Yeah.
I see on page 12, Mr. Mayor, that the total number of built properties, is in around that region of 10,000, a little bit over for water, a little bit under for wastewater.
That's now.
That's now. So there'll be an extrapolation and assumptions of the growth over 30 years that would lead to whatever that answer is. I see.
That would be 16 million-ish per year, whereas if we did not join, they're saying it would be 86 million-ish. If we didn't join. If we, yeah.
Yeah. The
Which
difference
that's where we have some.
10,000 per connection, and we've got 10,000.
No, 8,000.
A million already.
Under the proposal was $1,640 per connection. At 10,000 connections is around about 16 million. At 80,690 at roughly over 10,000 connections is about 90 million.
I thought that 8,900 was the ceiling.
Oh, push button. We can't hear you, councillors. Lynette, just quickly.
Sorry.
I thought the 8,900 was the maximum they modelled, whereas we were 10,000.
Oh, so the 8690 on the dashboard indeed is a capped number, and many councils are listed on their dashboard as 8690, as you might have seen. It was a cap that was introduced in recognition of the uncertainties of assuming capital expenditure over a period as long as 30 years. So rather than try and produce an exact number, given that length of time, it has been capped at 8690. So I do think if we're going to think about the numbers that WICS have provided, we concentrate on the 8690, because there is a concession there that the calculation producing the raw number it's got a lot of assumptions in it. So the 8690 is where we've been trying to focus.
And we do have a question back to DA on that. How accurate are those numbers? Because we don't really believe they are.
And just a reminder, Mr. Mayor, that when we had the session with Morrison Lowe, they said it is perfectly reasonable to doubt the actual numbers, but that the direction of travel made sense to them, just as it did to Farriers Ware and just as it did to Becker and Deloitte's when they did the peer reviews. So there's a kind of a question of sort of faith in the direction as opposed to the specific number, which Council may not be comfortable with, of course.
Yeah. Lynette, did you have another question? But just before you do, Hamish, the Mayoral Forum wrote to the Minister and asked to push the pause button and let's have some time to think about this and get the regulation in place, etc., before a decision is made. To my knowledge, I haven't heard back on that. Have we heard back? Are you aware?
Yes, she wrote a letter back which rejected the request for pause on the basis of the length of time that government and local government have been discussing the reform of Three Waters on and off, i.e. decades, and that there will be nothing to gain from a pause in her view.
Thank you. Councillor Lovett.
I was just going to ask about the 5 people on this entity and this job applications advertising going on. Who's on the interview panel? I hope it's not going to be a political move putting these 5 on. Is local government involved, or who is on that interview panel with putting these people
it takes
on?
to that structure of the governance.
So the reference to job applications, I presume, is a reference to the governance group. Is that your question? Sorry.
Well, it's really on the whole on the 5. We've got 5 iwi and 5 others on
the governance group.
So the governance group in below. So who's doing the interview? Is local for these people? Is it local government involved in this process, or is it politically, or DIO? Who's doing it?
So separate out the governance group from all other aspects of the reform structure. So the governance group as it currently stands is proposed to be 50-50 the local government representation and iwi. So the 50% under that model, that would be in Entity D, there will be a need for some sort of process for the 27 councils involved to elect their representatives. So that's going to be for councils and mayors and process to resolve. Ngāi Tahu will have to follow a process of how they appoint their 5 or 6 representatives from their 18 runanga. So there will be just as complicated a process, I imagine, for iwi as there will be for councils. Once the governance group is set up, they will appoint the selection panel, and the selection panel will appoint the directors of the entity. The directors will appoint the CEO, and the CEO will get on and appoint the staff of the new entity. So the role for councils is very much focused on the representatives on the governance group. That will be their only role under the proposed model in terms of selection of people.
And it will always be cheaper to that model, so we're told. But we have questions about that, the financial worthiness of those figures. Councillors, any further questions? No. Shall we move to the recommendation? Thank you, Hamish. Tony, Neil. The recommendation there, I'm prepared to move the recommendation, and on bullet points number 6, I'd like to read them so that we know exactly what our questions going back to the government will be. Point number 6 of the recommendation: request the CEO to seek guidance on and give feedback to the government on the following areas of government proposal that council needs more information on. How can council have guaranteed influence over the direction of the water services entity, given the complicated and multi-layered proposed governance structure? 2. What further work is planned on alternative ways of achieving balance sheet separation than the current multi-layered structure of the representative governance group and the independent selection panel? 3. How can the community have guaranteed influence given the size and scale of the entities? 4. How can council be guaranteed that the district's Three Waters investment priorities will be met? 5. How will council have the visibility of the future pricing proposals of the WSE? 6. Will the proposed economic regulator regulate all private supplies and WSEs, and if not, where is the cut-off point for not being regulated? 7. What work was done on the realities of stormwater being included in the reform proposals? 8. How will charging for stormwater work, noting the private and public benefits of stormwater? 9. How will the decisions be reached on which stormwater infrastructure transfers to the WSE and which remains with the Ashburton District Council? 10. How can council have a guarantee as to how the WSE will follow council's planning and land development ambitions and not be an inhibitor to the development in the Ashburton District? 11. How will the water services entities be compelled to contribute meaningfully to Ashburton District civil defence, emergency planning and management? 12. How does the Three Waters reform integrate meaningfully with the broader local government reform that is currently underway, most notably the reform of the RMA and the review into the future of the future for local government? 13. Has the government considered the impact of the reforms on local body governance? 14. How will rural schemes that are primarily supplying stock water be treated? 15. How will the government resource the workforce required for the reforms to be successful? 16. How will the maintenance contract between Ashburton District Council and our contractor Ashburton Contracting Limited be treated on the transfer, presumably on July 21st, 2024, including the protection of their workforce? And B, the following changes to the government's proposal process. 1. The government structure to be altered to enable direct council involvement in board and director performance, accountability, appointments, etc. 2. Ensure all information is available for asking councils to consult their communities and make a decision on the reforms, including all those matters raised in A above. And the rest is self-explanatory. So I'll move. I'm looking for a seconder.
I'll second.
Councillor McMillan. Open for debate. Councillor Cameron.
We were given a very strict time frame to respond to our questions and to get questions, regarding the Three Waters. I wonder if we should put a time frame on when we get our responses back from the government.
We could ask for that to be included. I just think actually, Councillor Mackay, you had one more you wanted to add, I think, and I was remiss.
You want me to go now?
If you could, put it in.
Mr Mayor, on those requests that you read out, I totally agree with, but I would like council to consider, so I have to move an amendment because the motion's...
No, you don't have to. The mover and seconder are happy to be added, then it'll be fine.
I'd like a brand new, and it's 17XV2 it will be. Will present consent conditions of council infrastructure be honoured? I raise it, I hadn't thought about it. Hadn't even entered my head until discussion earlier before morning tea, and I now think it's very pertinent that what infrastructures we have decided on in the past and the conditions that we have put round those infrastructures are actually honoured. That's why I raise it.
As mover, I'm happy to have that added in. A seconder happy? Seconders happy.
May I ask just if that could be repeated? I'm sorry, I was just navigating my way to that part of it.
Okay, so number 17, and I'm straight into it. Will present consent conditions of council infrastructure be honoured?
Sure.
Captured that, Philippa? Great. Move and second is happy with that. Councillor Lovett.
I'll second that.
No, we don't need to second that. There was a light on before. John, who went off. Yeah. Councillor Falloon.
Yeah, I certainly support the recommendation, but I'd also like to thank the authors of this report for summing up our doubts, questions in such a very professional way. I think it's an excellent report and they need to be well thanked for it.
Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, I'd agree with that, and I'd also just like to thank everyone that took the time to do the survey. I think that gave us a really good idea of what people were thinking, and I know we've received 200 plus emails today, or from yesterday and today, asking us to opt out. And I'm sure we've all had a number of phone calls as well, and it was really good to be able to tell people in the last 2 weeks to go to that survey and to have their say. And reading some of the comments, people were very well read on the situation, and it was really good to receive that. So thank you to the staff for doing that, and it's just given us, I think, a bit more of a peace of mind to look at what direction and to what questions to ask.
Thank you. Further debate? Councillor Mackay.
I think I'm allowed further debate because you asked me to comment, which I did. I would actually like us to be a wee bit clearer with the Minister. What is written here, I think, is technically absolutely correct and expresses the wish of the people in the Ashburton district that have replied to the questions. But I actually think we should, at this stage, be more direct and actually add in words, suggested words to the effect that at this present time, with the knowledge this council has, we will be opting out.
Just repeat that again, you missed.
Opting out. What do other councillors think?
I think you haven't got enough information to make a decision whether you opt in or opt out at the moment, and that information will be coming in the next stage, and we can make that decision as to what to do. At the moment, we're seeking feedback. Questions have gone to the DIA for answers to give us more information to make that decision at a later date. So still neutral on opting in or out, as far as I'm concerned, but happy to listen to other councillors. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. No, I definitely wouldn't play my hand at the moment. As good poker players know, you hold your hand until the final decision, and that's what I think we'll need to do. The only thing I would like to see is acknowledge the huge support we've got from the local district for us to opt out, to say we've acknowledged what they've said, and we'll definitely, when we make our decision finally in the next month or so, we definitely will be taking into account the groundswell that they've told us.
We've asked for consultation to be had once we have a proposal, and no doubt that a lot of the people will come back with their recommendations then on whether we opt in or opt out at a future date. I think it's too early to say either way yet. Councillor Falloon.
I certainly agree with Councillor Wilson. I mean, basically, we are still in a fact-finding situation. The part I'm waiting for is on the economic regulator. So to start playing politics now, I think would be premature.
Thank you. Further speakers for or against the motion? Councillor Lovett.
I'm sort of in a bit of a quandary here. We've got a lot of councils through this country at the moment stating, you know, they're not happy and they're not supporting it. And we're sitting here, sitting on the fence, not going to say one way or the other. And we've got all our ratepayers coming to us and bombing us, you know, and ringing us and sending in all their information. They're not happy for us to still stay in. So I'm sort of in a quandary. Do we kind of state our feelings at the moment? because we are being watched right through the country to see what we're going to do, and I think, you know, by now we should have, you know, on the information we've got and the questions we keep asking and getting no answers back, we probably should be sort of saying a bit of a statement how we feel.
This is the first opportunity to really ask the questions and get the answers back. We have been asking questions and getting answers. To go out at the moment is too early. We haven't got a proposal to ask them. We will be consulting with the community when we have that proposal to opt in or opt out. The feedback we've had with the information that the people out there have looked at are indicating to us we should opt out. Well, obviously we would take that on board, but we need the proposal in front of us to exactly what will happen before we can make that decision fully, I believe. Councillor Letton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree with Councillor Wilson. I think if we go around the table, most of us would be leaning towards opting out at this stage, but that's just an estimation. No one has actually said anything. But the Mayor, you're quite right. We can't put anything out for consultation because we've got a whole raft of questions that we do not know the answers to yet. And when we can get those answers, then we can make a decision as to whether we opt in or whether we opt out. So I think, like a number of others, I congratulate the people who put that report and recommendation together. It's an excellent piece of work. And I think we should just be steady, be calm, don't do anything out of fear, just take a time, get the answers, get the data, and then we'll make the decision.
You're correct, and they will be given the time to opt in or opt out at a later date. We're not, we're still gathering information. Councillor Brown.
And I'm one of the councillors who've still got a lot of questions, but I'm here for consultations. We send this away. Hopefully we get some decent answers. I'm sitting in the middle. I didn't make any decisions, but there's a lot of things I don't feel is not right yet.
Thank you. If no more speakers for or against the motions, I'll have the right to reply. I believe that we should get the horse and the cart around the right way. We need to pause. The regulations need to be set up first. When they're set up, we could run under them for the next X number of years to see whether we can meet the new regulations. In 4 or 5 years' time, we're struggling to meet the regulations, then we could look at combining with big entities to get efficiencies if they're there. I think we just need to slow down and get the horse and the cart in the right configuration. So I'm going to put the motion. I'm in favour. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for that report. It was very well done. And that will be heading off to DIA. The final piece for today is item number 6. And it's on page 62. 62 of my papers, and is submission to the Productivity Commission, Immigration, Productivity and Wellbeing Issues paper. Thank you. Rachel, welcome for your report, and supported by Simon and no doubt Tony. Should I take us through the report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this submission is part of a wider review on immigration settings in New Zealand. There will be recommendations released by the Productivity Commission before the end of the year, which Council can comment on as well. So this submission is the pre-engagement stage. I would like to clarify some things around the data in the report. We've taken the data from Infometrics. And Infometrics often report at a high level for industries, which is why we've used the agriculture, forestry and fisheries category. I have handed out an amended copy of the snapshot section from the submission where we detail some key statistics on the district. So the major change here is the section on GDP. It was brought to my attention that we did not include data for individual industries' contribution to GDP growth. We have now included some data on this in the table you can see on point 3. It is important to identify in the submission that we are heavily reliant on primary industries, in particular the dairy industry, and this clearly impacts our workforce needs. However, we do know that many industries relate to primary industries. Therefore, identifying individual industries' impact on GDP does not tell the full picture. In the table, we have included the primary industry categories which specifically relate. There are a number of other industries, though, that we know have some correlation. We estimate approximately 50% of total GDP can be attributed in some way to primary industries. The other change to the submission is that we have included a link to the report produced by NZIER on the labour market, which shows that the cost as a result of the labour market shortage in the district was 16 million in 2018. And Simon will happily provide further detail on that if there are questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Councillors, any questions? No, Councillor McMillan.
Thank you. I have a question through the chair, and it's on number 30, page 72, and I can't find it, what's happened. And it's regarding the families of migrants, and I just wondered if you had taken into consideration the problem that some of the school leavers have who are not residents of New Zealand, so when they leave school at the end of year 13, they can only go to university if they pay international student fees. I know it's a huge problem. I think there's a few youth council members we may know who are in that situation, and I'm just wondering if it could be clarified in the report. Another thing that I heard the other day at one of the primary schools is their roles are dropping considerably because there's not as many migrant families coming through, and I just wondered if that somehow could be included or just noted in the report as well, please.
So we're going to add those two things in, Rachel.
Through the chair, yes, we'll absolutely address those. In terms of the review in general, the Productivity Commission is being very clear that this is about looking forward, and they know that there is an issue at the moment facing many regions, but we have put many comments in here about the impact of the immigration delays on migrants, so I will add that in. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
Yes, Rachel might have answered the question. At the moment, there's a lot of immigrants on visas that have been here up to 10 years, and they're part of our society. Their children are part of our society, and they just cannot get residency. Well, it seems to be, is it a government policy change? Because, I mean, in past years we've had big numbers naturalised in this district, and it seems to have dried up. Is it a government policy at the moment to stop that?
Through the chair, so there is a freeze on immigration at the moment. This review is hopefully going to come up with a solution about how it can be addressed going forward. There are many different views on this. One commentator that I heard the other day suggested that everything should be processed that's pending in the system at the moment and start again fresh. So hopefully this review will identify some of those things to the government.
Councillor Cameron?
Thank you for the report and this piece of paper. Is it inferring that the productivity growth, the decline from positive 4.3 to minus 0.61, is due to immigration delays? Is that the inference that we take from this report?
Through the chair, it's not the only reason. Obviously, COVID has impacted productivity growth and the labour workforce shortage in particular as well. Simon, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, through the chair, I think it's a contributory factor. It's not the only factor.
Okay. So through the chair. So what you're saying, the COVID has caused the immigration delays, essentially, hasn't it? They've put a stop on immigration at the moment. Well,
through the chair. The government policy is quite unclear around immigration at the moment. They have certainly stopped the process for a lot of people at the moment, which is having a massive impact on our businesses in the district. We're hearing anecdotally stories of farmers who are unable to get workers onto the farm working 20-hour days to compensate for the lack of labour. We are hearing about a particular farm I heard this morning as I came into the office that had lost 5 workers due to better immigration situations in other countries. So they'd gone to Australia, where they're able to go through the residency process much faster, and also bring their families together at the same time, which some of our current policy settings are not letting occur. So Canada and Australia seem to be gearing up far better than we are.
I've heard that as well. I think it is a point that would be very useful if we could quantify that somehow on a subset of the group, if we could somehow quantify how many people have moved, like if we had some more factual data. My other question, if I may, in 2020 productivity in the district was 130,000 per job, so has that declined 5% from that for the latest one? So it's 2020, so what was it in 19? It was 5% higher than that, presumably. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I could include that figure in there as well, if you like.
Well, it just would make it quite impactful, wouldn't it? And answer it and just make a nice story. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, I think it just needs to be pointed out the urgency with which this review needs to be done, because by the time it goes through the wheels of bureaucracy, there's not going to be an overseas migrant here. We can't replace them. And we already know it's having an effect on the stress levels of those employers who are employing these people. So I think it's the urgency that's got to be stressed.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Do we put in there the artificially high barrier they've got to people to qualify for residency as far as salaries go? I think they're quite high. They're almost expecting, farm owners or farm managers to be eligible, whereas I think it should be within the average wage type thing. We haven't mentioned that, but is it a barrier that they've got at the moment?
So one of the views of government is that they don't want to bring people into New Zealand on low minimum wage jobs. So they have a requirement of I can't remember the hourly rate, but there is a requirement that migrants are over that hourly rate. The difficulty we've got, and the government position is also that if people are struggling to employ workers, then they need to look at the conditions and the pay that is being offered to make their positions more attractive to people who are available to the labour market. So we've got kind of a conflicting position, I guess, of a massive skill shortage, the government's view of there are New Zealanders or people able to work in New Zealand that can do those jobs, and what we're seeing in practice is a massive disconnect of those two positions.
Yeah, seems to be a massive disconnect, whereas we'll get an immigrant to come and do a job and they need to be paid there, yet our New Zealanders can do the same job and be paid a lot lower. It doesn't seem fair to me. Lift one or pull the other one down, but the job's the job and the reward is the reward for it. Yeah, interesting point. Any further questions, councillors? If there's not, someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Cameron, Councillor Rawlinson. Open for debate. Being no debate, I'll put the motion. I'm in favour. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Thanks for your report. Well done. Let's send that off to where it needs to go to. Philippa, that's everything done? Yep. I'll declare the meeting closed and